Welcome to our deep dive into the Supreme Court of the United States.
Supreme Court.
Yeah, today we're going to try to unpack this institution. Huge, powerful, explore its structure, its functions, and, ultimately how it impacts all of us, you and me, American society.
Right. And I think one of the things that we should talk about is just give those thought-provoking questions, like how does its power impact the balance of power in the U.S. government?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Let's start with the basics.
Okay.
The Supreme Court, it's the highest court in the land. We all know that. But what exactly does that mean, like, for us, everyday folks?
So what it means is that the Supreme Court has the final say in legal matters across the board.
Wow.
And so it's the ultimate court of appeals. And what that means is it makes sure that the law and the Constitution are applied consistently across the entire country.
Yeah.
And so every decision that they make has this ripple effect that, shapes our legal understanding, and it sets precedents for years to come.
It's really incredible to think that nine people can have such a profound impact on, millions of lives.
Yeah, their rulings can influence policy, they can impact social norms, and they even affect how we think about our own rights and freedoms.
So it's not just, dusty old law books and robes.
No, it's actually a very dynamic institution, and its interpretations of the law can and have evolved as society changes.
Interesting.
And so, what was considered constitutional 100 years ago might be viewed completely differently today.
That's a great point. Speaking of those nine justices, how do they become part of this incredibly powerful group?
So they're nominated by the President of the United States,
Oh,
and then they have to be confirmed by the Senate.
right.
And so this process often involves intense scrutiny, political wrangling, and a deep dive into the nominees' past decisions and their legal philosophy.
So that sounds like a recipe for some serious drama.
Oh, yeah.
But before we get lost in the weeds of Senate confirmations, let's focus on what the Supreme Court actually does on a daily basis.
Yeah. So their primary role is to be the final judges in cases that have been appealed from lower courts, both federal and state.
Okay.
And they also review cases that involve interpreting the Constitution, making sure that its principles are being upheld.
So they're not like retrying cases or re-examining evidence?
No, they're really focused on the legal process itself, making sure the law is applied correctly, that precedents are set, and any constitutional questions are answered.
That makes sense. So let's say a case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court.
All the way up.
All the way up. What happens then? Do all nine justices get together and hash it out?
Well, yeah, so after they review written briefs and they hear oral arguments from both sides,
Right.
the justices meet in private conference to deliberate and to vote.
Wow.
And those conferences are totally shrouded in secrecy, which adds another layer of intrigue to their process.
It's almost like they're, some modern-day Delphic oracle issuing pronouncements from behind closed doors. I imagine those discussions must get pretty heated, especially when you're dealing with, really divisive issues.
They do. And it's important to remember that you have these 9 individuals with their own unique legal interpretations, and in some cases differing viewpoints.
Right.
But they ultimately have to reach a majority decision.
And this is where the idea of judicial review comes in.
Yes.
This power they have to decide if a law is constitutional or not.
Exactly. Judicial review is one of the most potent tools that the Supreme Court has.
Really?
And it's basically their ability to strike down laws passed by Congress or actions taken by the president if they decide that they are in conflict with the Constitution. And this power has shaped the course of legal history in America, impacting everything from civil rights to the environment.
It's fascinating how one court can act as a check on the power of the other two branches of government. It almost makes you wonder if the Founding Fathers even envisioned the Supreme Court having this much influence.
Well, that's a question that legal scholars have debated for centuries. And the funny thing is that the Constitution itself doesn't explicitly give the court the power of judicial review. This was actually established through a landmark case, Marbury v. Madison in 1803.
Oh yeah, Marbury v. Madison.
Yeah.
Every law student's favorite case. Can you remind us why it was so important?
Yeah, so basically the court ruled that it had the authority to review laws passed by Congress and determine if they were constitutional or not.
Oh.
And so this decision established the principle of judicial review, effectively giving the Supreme Court the power to invalidate laws that it thought were in conflict with the Constitution.
So in a way, the Supreme Court kind of gave itself this incredible power.
It did.
That's pretty bold. No wonder that case is considered a cornerstone of American law.
It is, and the impact is still felt today. Every time the court strikes down a law, It reaffirms its role as guardian of the Constitution and a check on the power of the other branches of government.
It's mind-blowing to think that a court case from over 200 years ago still holds so much power today. But I guess that speaks to the, enduring nature of the Constitution and the role of the Supreme Court in interpreting its principles for a society that's always evolving.
Exactly. It's that ability to adapt and reinterpret the Constitution that keeps the Supreme Court relevant in the 21st century.
Speaking of keeping things relevant,
Yeah.
what are some current issues that we might see the Supreme Court tackle in the near future?
Oh, there's so many.
I bet.
Things like data privacy in the digital age, legal implications of climate change, and the ongoing debate over gun control.
Wow.
Just a few.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about. Makes you
Yeah.
realize just how much their decisions affect our daily lives.
They do.
But before we dive into the specifics of those issues, let's take a step back and examine another aspect of the Supreme Court that I think often sparks a lot of debate, and that's the lifetime appointments of its justices.
That's a great point. And, this system is designed to ensure judicial independence, but it often finds itself at the center of the debate around the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and it's a conversation I think that is definitely worth exploring in a little bit more detail.
Absolutely. So those lifetime appointments for
Yeah.
Supreme Court justices, they're designed to ensure their independence. But it's a system that really often finds itself at the center of debate.
Yeah, it is. It's tricky because we want judges to be impartial, right? And to make decisions based on the law, not based on, trying to please the public or worrying about reelection. But at the same time, shouldn't there be some form of accountability?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's really the crux of the argument against lifetime appointments. Critics are worried that without some mechanism for regular review or some potential for removal, that justices might feel like they're beyond reproach.
Yeah.
And this could potentially lead to decisions that are out of touch with, our evolving societal values.
I can see that because if a justice makes a ruling that's widely viewed as detrimental or even just plain wrong, we can't vote them out in the next election.
Right, exactly. And with justices potentially serving for decades, a single appointment can have these ripple effects on legal interpretation for a generation or even more.
Yeah, it makes you think about the legacy that these justices leave behind. Every decision they make is, contributing to this larger tapestry of American law.
That's a great way to put it. Their rulings become part of this ongoing dialogue about the Constitution and how we apply it in, a modern context.
Okay, so we've talked about the accountability side. What about the arguments in favor of lifetime appointments? What makes this system so appealing?
Well, the main argument hinges on the idea that justices need to be protected from political pressure.
Okay.
Imagine if a judge had to constantly worry about re-election campaigns or pleasing specific interest groups.
Oh, yeah.
Would they really be free to make impartial rulings, even if those rulings were unpopular?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's like expecting a referee to call a fair game when they've got, one team's fans screaming at them.
Right. And so this lifetime appointment system seeks to create that neutral playing field. It allows justices to delve into these complex legal issues and to make decisions based solely on their interpretation of the law and the Constitution without being afraid of reprisal or political backlash.
So essentially, it's about protecting the integrity of the judicial process.
Precisely. Proponents argue that this system ensures that the Supreme Court remains a true check on the power of the other branches of government.
Right.
A safeguard against tyranny of the majority and a defender of individual rights, even when those rights are unpopular.
Okay, I'm starting to see the logic behind it, even if it isn't without, its flaws. It's like we're always trying to find that balance
It is a delicate balance.
between independence and accountability.
It is, and it's a conversation that continues to evolve as we grapple with new challenges and social issues.
Well, you mentioned earlier that, the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution can change over time. Is there a specific case that sort of exemplifies this evolution of thought?
Oh, there are many, but the shift in the court's stance on racial segregation is a very powerful example.
Okay.
So in 1896, the case Plessy v. Ferguson upheld the constitutionality of separate but equal facilities for Black and white Americans.
Wait, so the Supreme Court actually ruled that segregation was okay?
They did. At that time, the court's interpretation of the 14th Amendment allowed for segregation as long as the facilities that were provided for each race were considered to be equal.
It's hard to believe that such a decision was ever considered acceptable.
It's a stark reminder of how far we've come as a society
Right.
and how the legal understanding of equality has really evolved.
Yeah.
So if we fast forward to 1954, we see a complete reversal of this thinking in the landmark case, Brown v. Board of Education.
Ah, Brown v. Board. That's the case that declared segregated schools unconstitutional.
Yes.
That was a major turning point in the civil rights
It
movement.
was a major turning point. The court unanimously overturned Plessy v. Ferguson,
Wow.
and they ruled that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal and violate the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection.
It's amazing how the court can acknowledge its own past mistakes and then issue these rulings that fundamentally reshape our understanding of, rights and equality.
It really speaks to the dynamic nature of legal interpretation and the court's, willingness to adapt to changing societal norms and values. Of course, this doesn't mean the court always gets it right.
Right.
But it does show that there is a capacity for self-correction and, an awareness of its role in trying to shape a more just society.
So the court isn't just stuck in the past, interpreting the Constitution through like this static lens.
Yeah.
It's actively engaged in a dialogue with the present, trying to apply these really old principles to contemporary issues.
Exactly. And, as new challenges arise, the court will continue to grapple with how the Constitution applies to everything from artificial intelligence to data privacy to, the potential legal ramifications of climate change.
It makes you wonder what future generations will think of the decisions that are being made today. Will they look at our current, legal landscape the way we view the era of Plessy v. Ferguson
It's interesting.
as a time of, flawed thinking that needed to be corrected? Or will they view our current court as visionary, laying the groundwork for a more just future?
That's a fascinating question, and only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The Supreme Court will continue to play a really pivotal role in shaping the American legal landscape for generations to come.
Yeah, it really highlights the weight of those lifetime appointments that we were talking about.
It does. Each justice's interpretation of the Constitution contributes to this constantly evolving body of law.
Right.
It shapes how we understand our rights and our freedoms, and its legacy that really extends far beyond their time on the bench.
So knowing how much impact they have, it makes the whole debate about lifetime appointments even more interesting. So do you think term limits would be a better solution?
Well, it's a question that comes up often, especially when people feel like the court's decisions are out of sync with,
Yeah.
current societal values. And proponents of term limits argue that it would make the court more responsive to the will of the people, and it would prevent any single justice from holding too much power for too long.
That makes sense. But wouldn't term limits also potentially politicize the court? Because if justices know that they have a limited time, on the bench, wouldn't they be more likely to maybe make decisions that would please those who might reappoint them?
Yeah, that is a concern that's raised by people who support the current system. They argue that lifetime appointments are the best way to ensure judicial independence by allowing justices to make decisions based on their understanding of the law, even if those decisions are unpopular.
So it's a tough call.
It is.
Trying to balance accountability with independence. So is there a perfect solution?
Well, I think that's the beauty and the challenge of our system of government. It's this constant process of checks and balances, of, weighing different perspectives and trying to find solutions that, if not perfect, at least strive for fairness and justice.
I think what fascinates me the most about the Supreme Court is that it's not just about legal theory or abstract principles. It's about real people's lives and the very fabric of American society.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The court's decisions on things like free speech, religious freedom, privacy rights, equal protection under the law, those directly impact our lives, in really profound ways.
And it's almost overwhelming to think about how much power these 9 individuals have. So do you think they ever feel the weight of that responsibility?
I would imagine it's a constant pressure. Each case they hear represents this clash of values.
Wow.
A conflict that needs to be resolved, within the framework of the Constitution. They're tasked with interpreting this document that was written centuries ago.
Right.
And applying its principles to a world that the Founding Fathers could never have imagined.
Yeah, it's a task that requires not only legal expertise, but also a deep understanding of history, societal context, and even, a bit of foresight into the potential consequences of their rulings.
And I think that's what makes the Supreme Court so captivating. It's like this microcosm of the American experiment itself. A constant struggle to balance individual liberties with the needs of a society that's always evolving.
And as we continue to face new challenges, like the rise of technology, the impact of climate change, just the ever-shifting social landscape, The Supreme Court will be there interpreting the Constitution and shaping the legal framework for how we navigate these uncharted waters.
Exactly. The court's role is more vital now than ever. And as citizens, it's our responsibility to engage with the court's decisions, understand their implications, and participate in the ongoing dialogue about, the role of the court in our lives.
Well said. Well, it's been a really enlightening journey into the world of the Supreme Court. And to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating institution, delve into its history, its landmark cases, and the ongoing debates that shape its role in American society.
Remember, the Supreme Court's decisions affect all of us. So staying informed and engaged is crucial to understanding our rights and participating in the conversation about the future of our nation.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring the world around us.